Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to another lesson, a shared reading lesson from Mr. Skazen. Today we are going to be reading Sarah and the Chickens, an excerpt from Sarah, Plain and Tall. So first, let's talk about the word excerpt, and just to remind ourselves, the word excerpt means that we are looking at a snapshot of a larger story. So this is just a small piece of writing out of a larger story. Okay, today's goals. Today's goals are to find out how pictures help us understand the text and how characters in the story lead to changes. Okay, how characters' actions affect changes in the story. Okay, so let's start by reading our excerpt. It is the late 1800s in the newly developed farmland of the West. Sarah, a young woman from Maine, answers an ad to become a wife for Jacob, a widower. A widower is a man who has lost his wife. Okay, so Jacob does not have a wife anymore. Caleb and Anna, Jacob's children, fall in love with Sarah. Life on the prairie is different and demanding, and Sarah misses the sea. Will she stay longer than 1 month, to which she has agreed? Okay, so this part of the story is called the, if I can get my text box. This part of the story is called a preamble. And a preamble sets up the story. Okay, so this part sets up the story. Okay. And some key things that we learned in here was Jacob is a widower. So we've been introduced to our characters, which are Jacob. We have Caleb and Anna, which are Jacob's children. And we have Sarah, a young woman from Maine, who is going to become a wife for Jacob. Okay, so we can already see some things that are developing in the story. Jacob's children fall in love with Sarah, but Sarah, it sounds like, misses the sea, misses her home. So will she stay longer or will she go home? Okay, let's start by reading the first paragraph. Paragraph 1. The dandelions in the fields had gone by, their heads soft as feathers. The summer roses were opening. Our neighbors, Matthew and Maggie, came to help Papa plow up a new field for corn. Sarah stood with us on the porch, watching their wagon wind up the road. 2 horses pulling it, and one tied in back. I remembered the last time we had stood here alone, Caleb and I waiting for Sarah. Sarah's hair was in thick braids that circled her head, wild daisies tucked here and there. Papa had picked them for her. Old Bess and Jack ran along the inside of the fence, whickering at the new horses. Papa needs 5 horses for the big gang plow, Caleb told Sarah. Prairie grass is hard. Matthew and Maggie came with their 2 children and a sack full of chickens. Maggie emptied the sack into the yard, and 3 red banty chickens clucked and scattered. They are for you, she told Sarah. For eating. Okay. So let's take a look at some of the words on this story before we move on. Okay. So we have whickering. at the new horses. So our word wickering, that's kind of, they're noisy. Okay, they're wickering at the new horses as they run along the fence. And so we can kind of put noisy. And we have another word, banty. Maggie emptied the sack into the yard, and 3 red banty chickens clucked and scattered. So banty. So these are kind of the same words. They're banty. They're noisy. They're clucking with each other. We have 2 kind of words that relate to noisy. They're clucking back and forth with each other. Okay, so we have some new words we have learned. Let's keep going in the story. So we've been introduced to 2 new characters, Matthew and Maggie. They're the neighbors. They come over and they deliver these chickens. And actually, yes, our text feature. We got to talk about our text feature. So our picture. How does this picture lead to a better understanding of the story? Well, it's showing us what life is like on the prairie. Okay, so I get my text box. So I can write, our picture shows us what life is like on the prairie. Prairie. What is that? Oh, AI. So what life is like on the prairie. Okay, and we can see, they're still in horse and buggy. We can see the tall cornfields. And the ground is really thick that they need a lot of horses to plow the fields. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, and I forgot with this one. It leaves. Now we gotta erase before we keep going. Okay, so let's keep going. Paragraph 8. Sarah loved the chickens. She clucked back to them and fed them grain. They followed her, shuffling and scratching primly in the dirt. I knew they would not be for eating. Okay, so we've learned something about we have a character problem, right? So Sarah loved the chickens, but the chickens were for eating. So this might cause a problem later in the story. We'll have to find out because our narrator says, I knew they would not be for eating. We also have another word. Let me get a different color. We have this word here, primly. Okay, so primly is, it kind of means they're proper, they're nicely pecking each individual grain in the dirt as she feeds them, nice and neat. All right, let's keep reading. Paragraph 9. The children were young and named Rose and Violet after flowers. They hooted and laughed and chased the chickens who flew up to the porch roof, then the dogs who crept quietly under the porch. Seal had long ago fled to the barn to sleep in cool hay. Sarah and Maggie helped hitch the horses to the plow. Then they set up a big table in the shade of the barn, covering it with a quilt and a kettle of flowers in the middle. They sat on the porch while Caleb and Matthew and Papa began their morning of plowing. I mixed biscuit dough just inside the door, watching. Paragraph 11. You are lonely, yes? Asked Maggie in her soft voice. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Slowly, I stirred the dough. So this is telling us a lot about Sarah. Okay, so we learn Maggie asks her, "You are lonely." So we find out about Sarah's character that her eyes filled with tears. So this is telling us that she is lonely, right? She starts to cry. Maggie reached over and took Sarah's hand. "I miss the hills of Tennessee sometimes," she said. "Do not miss the hills, Maggie," I thought. "I miss the sea," said Sarah. So we're learning, Sarah is missing her home. She misses the sea. Do not miss the hills. Do not miss the sea. I stirred and stirred the dough. "I miss my brother William." So now we learn not only is she missing her home, she also misses her family. But he is married. The house is hers now, not mine any longer. There are 3 old aunts who all squawk together like crows at dawn. I miss them too. So she also misses her 3 old aunts. There are always things to miss, said Maggie, no matter where you are. So we can kind of see, right? This little girl, the little girl Maggie, is trying to convince Sarah to stay already. She's saying, you know what? No matter where you are, there's always things to miss, no matter what. There's always things to miss, no matter where you are. I looked out and saw Papa and Matthew and Caleb working. Rose and Violet ran in the fields. I felt something brush my legs and looked down at Nick, wagging his tail. Okay, and we can see, if before we go on to the next page, we can take a look at this text feature here. So this picture, I make an arrow. This introduces us to the character of Sarah, right? So now we know what Sarah looks like. So this is Sarah down here. That gives us a little picture of what she looks like. We can see the 3 chickens that, they were supposed to eat, but now she's slowly starting to fall in love with her chickens. So this is helping us understand the story by introducing us to one of the main characters. Okay, I gotta erase again. All right, we're about to read paragraph 22. All right, paragraph 22. I would miss you, Nick, I whispered. I would. I knelt down and scratched his ear. I miss Mama. I nearly forgot, said Maggie on the porch. I have something more for you. I carried the bowl outside and watched Maggie lift a low wooden box out of the wagon. Plants, she said to Sarah, for your garden. So again, we see Maggie, she lifts this low wooden box out of her wagon and she says, plants for your garden. Here you go, Sarah. So she's giving Sarah more reason to stay. So these are Maggie's actions. So Maggie's actions are leading the character Sarah. She's trying to convince the character Sarah to stay. My garden? Sarah bent down to touch the plants. Zinnias and marigolds and wild feverfew, said Maggie. You must have a garden wherever you are. Sarah smiled. I had a garden in Maine with Delilahs and columbine and nasturtiums, the color of the sun when it sets. I don't know if nasturtiums would grow here. Try, said Maggie. You must have a garden. So we can see Maggie is still trying to develop this relationship with Sarah to make her stay. So when Sarah thinks of her garden, she is smiling. So Maggie's doing everything she can to make Sarah want to stay and not go home. We planted the flowers by the porch, turning over the soil and patting it around them and watering. Lottie and Nick came to sniff, and the chickens walked in the dirt, leaving prints. In the fields, the horses pulled the plow up and down under the hot summer sun. Maggie wiped her face, leaving a streak of dirt. Soon you can drive your wagon over to my house, and I will give you more. I have Tansy. Sarah frowned. I have never driven a wagon. I can teach you, said Maggie, and so can Anna and Caleb and Jacob. Sarah turned to me. Can you? She asked. Can you drive a wagon? I nodded. And Caleb? Yes. All right, so this text feature down here is giving us a picture of, the different kinds of flowers that they planted in their garden. Gotta erase again. Okay, paragraph 40. In Maine, said Sarah, I would walk to town. Well, here it's different, said Maggie. Here, you will drive. Way off in the sky, clouds gathered. Matthew and Papa and Caleb came in from the fields, their work done. We all ate in the shade. We are glad you are here, said Matthew to Sarah. A new friend. Maggie misses her friends sometimes. Sarah nodded. There is always something to miss, no matter where you are, she said, smiling at Maggie. Ooh, this is a good thing. So it looks like Maggie's actions earlier have started to rub off on Sarah, because now Sarah says there's always something to miss no matter where you are, which is what Maggie told Sarah earlier on in the story. So now it looks like Maggie's actions are starting to pay off. She might be now convincing Sarah to finally stay. And if we look at this text feature down here, we are being introduced to the two kids, right? So down here, this is probably Maggie. Now we know what Maggie looks like. And this could either be Caleb and Matt or Matthew. We're not too sure yet. And the three chickens are still out there. But this at least introduces us to what the character Maggie looks like, right? So we can for sure say, okay, this is Maggie. So now we know what Sarah looks like. We know what Maggie looks like. And this could either be Matthew or Caleb. All right, let's keep reading. 45. Rose and Violet fell asleep in the grass, their bellies full of meat and greens and biscuits. And when it was time to go, Papa and Matthew lifted them into the wagon to sleep on blankets. Sarah walked slowly behind the wagon for a long time, waving, watching it disappear. Caleb and I ran to bring her back. The chickens running wild behind us. Okay, so now, after reading a little bit farther, we know that this is the character Caleb. So this picture is helping us understand what the character Caleb looks like. "What shall we name them?" asked Sarah, laughing as the chickens followed us into the house. I smiled. I was right. The chickens would not be for eating. And then Papa came just before the rain, bringing Sarah the first roses of summer. Okay, so now we know what Papa looks like. Okay. All right, we can see that, he's trying to convince Sarah to like him. He's giving her the roses, making her feel all nice inside. Oh, okay. So good, we've reached the end. So we can say that through, let's go to our text box actually. So I'm going to put big text box here and make it a little bigger so we can read. Okay, so I'm going to put character actions. And we can see throughout the story, the character Maggie was constantly trying to convince the character Sarah to stay with them, or to stay with their family. So we can say, if we look back here near the end, we know that she finally has convinced Sarah, because Sarah says something to Maggie. Maggie told her this earlier in the story. Sarah nodded, "There's always something to miss no matter where you are," she said, smiling at Maggie. And that's what Maggie said to her earlier on in the story. So we could finish it off with, in the text, Sarah repeats a saying that Maggie told her. We gotta put a capital on her name. That Maggie told her. But there is always something to miss, no matter where you are. Okay, so this shows us, make this a little bit bigger. Oh, is that as big as I can make it? Maybe we might need another text box. I get another text box here. This shows us well, let's get our eraser. We know this is Papa. So let's get our eraser. And then we'll put a text box in. Okay, so this shows us that that Maggie has convinced Sarah to stay with their family. All right. Oh, what happened? All right. Awesome. Okay, so that concludes today's shared reading lesson. We took a look at character actions and how they changed the story, and we also looked at the text features, the pictures in the story, and how they led us to a better understanding of the story.